Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
They say we're going to do things a little differently than what we normally do. And some of the pictures may be kind of graphic for some people, and others it may not be. But it is as true to actual facts and documentation as we could humanly get. So, watch the screen and enjoy. Thank you.
You are the Lord, the famous one, great is your name in all the earth. Heavens declare you're glorious, great is your fame beyond the earth.
Look at the passion of Jesus Christ. It might be kind of graphic, so I will give you fair warning. We're going to look at it from a medical and physiological point of view. We'll discuss some of the physical aspects of the passion or the suffering of Jesus Christ. We shall follow him from Gethsemane through his trial and his scourging, his path along the Via Dolorosa to his last dying hours on the cross. I suddenly realized that I'd taken the crucifixion more or less for granted all of these years, that I had grown callous to its horror and a too easy familiarity with me and with the grim details, and a too distant friendship with him. It finally occurred to me that as a physician, I didn't know the actual immediate cause of death. The gospel writers don't help us out very well in this area, because the crucifixion and the scourging were so common during those times that they undoubtedly considered it a detailed description would be totally useless because everybody knew about it. So we have the concise words from the evangelists. Pilate, having scourged Jesus, delivered him to them to be crucified, and they crucified him. The infinite psyche and spiritual suffering of the incarnate God in atonement for our sins and all the sins of fallen man, I have no competence to discuss. However, the physiological and anatomical aspects of our Lord's passion we can examine in some detail. What did the body of Jesus of Nazareth actually go through?
All the earth rejoice. He wraps himself in light, and darkness tries to hide, and trembles at his voice, trembles at his voice. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end, beginning and the end. The Godhead, three and one, Father, Spirit, Son, the Lion and the Lamb, the Lion and the Lamb. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. How great is our God? Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God. Name above all names, worthy of all praise. My heart will sing, how great is our God.
After learning what the body of Jesus went through during that time of scourging, this led me first to a study of the practice of crucifixion itself. That is, the torture and the execution of a person by fixation to a cross. Apparently, the first known practice of crucifixion was by the Persians. Alexander and his generals brought it back to the Mediterranean world, to Egypt, and to Carthage. The Romans apparently learned the practice from the Carthaginians, and, as with almost everything the Romans did, rapidly developed a very high degree of efficiency and skill in carrying this out. A number of Roman authors Levi, Cicero, Tacitus have all commented on it. So with 3 witnesses, they always used to say if 2 witnesses come against you, it's true. So 3 make it even more true. They had several innovations and modifications that are described in the ancient literature. I'll mention only a few that may have some bearing here. The upright position of the cross, or the stipes, could have the cross arm, or the patibulum, attached 2 or 3 feet below its top. And this is what we are commonly used to seeing and what we have called the Latin cross. However, the common form used in our Lord's day was the tau cross, shaped like the Greek letter tau, or like our T. In this cross, the patibulum was placed in a notch at the top of the stipes. There's fairly overwhelming archaeological evidence that it was on this type of cross that Jesus was crucified. The upright post, or the stipes, was generally permanently fixed in the ground at the site of the execution, and the condemned man was forced to carry the patibulum, apparently weighing about 110 pounds, from the prison to the place of execution. But without any historical or biblical proof, medieval and Renaissance painters have given us our picture of Christ carrying the entire cross. Many of these painters and most of the sculptures of crucifixion today show that the nails were driven between the fingers. But if you feel your hand, you can feel how the bones run up and down. There's nothing in the crossways to hold it, so it would just tear loose from the weight of a body. And that would be even more painful because they'd have to re-nail the person to the cross. Because we see this and we read about it through a misconception and misunderstanding of Jesus' words to Thomas. Observe my hands. Anatomists, both modern and ancient, have also considered the wrist as part of the hand. And you can feel the bones in the wrist and in the lower arm that would support the weight of a human body. The physical passion of the Christ begins in Gethsemane. One of many aspects of this initial suffering, I shall only discuss the one of physiological interest, the bloody sweat. It's interesting that the physician of the group, Luke, is the only one to mention this in all of the Gospels. He says, and being in agony, he prayed the longer, and his sweat became as drops of blood trickling down upon the ground.
Who believe in him He is the Alpha and Omega. There is no other way. There is no other way.
A titleist or small sign stating the victim's crime was usually carried at the front of the procession and later nailed to the cross above the head of the victim. The sign with its staff nailed to the top of the cross would have given it a somewhat characteristic form of the Latin cross. The physical passion of Christ begins in Gethsemane. One of many aspects of this initial suffering, I shall only discuss the one of physiological interest. Under great emotional stress, the combination of blood and sweat is documented, and it is called hematidrosis. Tiny capillaries in the sweat glands can break, thus mixing blood with sweat. This process alone could have produced marked weakness and possible shock. We shall move rapidly through the betrayal and the arrest, but I must stress again that the important portions of the Passion story are missing from this account. They just didn't document it. This may be frustrating to us, but in order to adhere to our purpose of discussing only the purely physical aspects of the Passion, this is necessary. After the arrest in the middle of the night, Jesus was brought before the Sanhedrin and Caiaphas, the high priest. It is here that the first physical trauma is inflicted. A soldier struck Jesus across the face for remaining silent when questioned by Caiaphas. The palace guards then blindfolded him and mockingly taunted him to identify them as they each passed by, spat on him, and struck him in the face. In the early morning, Jesus, battered and bruised, dehydrated and exhausted from a sleepless night of continual beatings, is taken across Jerusalem to the praetorium of the Fortress Antonia, the seat of government of the Procurator of Judea, Pontius Pilate. You are, of course, familiar with Pilate's action in attempting to pass responsibility to Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch, or the king of Judea. Jesus apparently suffered no physical mistreatment at the hands of Herod and was returned to Pilate. It was then, in response to the cries of the mob that had gathered, that Pilate ordered Barabbas released and condemned Jesus to scourging and crucifixion. There's much disagreement among authorities about scourging as a prelude to crucifixion. Most Roman writers from this time period do not associate the two. Many scholars believe that Pilate originally ordered Jesus scourged as his full punishment, but that the death sentence by crucifixion only came in response to the taunts from the crowd that had gathered, that the procurator was not properly defending Julius Caesar, this pretender who claimed to be king of the Jews. prisoner is stripped of all of his clothing, his hands tied to a post above his head. It's doubtful whether the Romans made any attempt to follow the Jewish law in this matter of scourging. The Jews had an ancient law prohibiting more than 49 lashes. The Pharisees, always wanting to make sure that the law was strictly kept, insisted that only 39 lashes be given in case of a count. That way they would still fall under the Jewish law. They would be within it. The Roman legionnaire steps forward with the leather thongs with 2 small balls of lead attached near the ends of each. The heavy whip is brought down with full force again and again and again across Jesus' shoulders, back, and legs. At first, the heavy thongs cut through the skin only. But then, as the blows continue, they cut deeper into the subcutaneous tissues, producing first an oozing of blood from the capillaries and veins of the skin, and finally spurting arterial bleeding from the vessels in the underlying muscles as they're slowly destroyed, one splash at a time. Finally, the skin of the back is hanging in long ribbons, and the entire area is an unrecognizable mess of torn, bleeding tissue. Kind of reminds you of raw hamburger there. When it was determined by the centurion in charge that the prisoner was near death, the beating is finally stopped. The half-fainting, exhausted Jesus is then untied and allowed to slump to the stone pavement, wet with his own blood and sweat. The Roman soldiers see a great joke in this provincial king, who is just another Jew claiming to be a king. They throw a robe across his shoulders and place a stick in his hand for a scepter. But they still need a crown to make their travesty complete. So a small bundle of flexible branches covered in long thorns, commonly used for firewood, is pleated into the shape of a crown, and this is pressed into his scalp. Again, there is copious bleeding, because the scalp is one of the most vascular areas of the body. If you've ever cut your head, it seems to bleed forever. After mocking him and striking him across the face, the soldiers take the stick from his hand and strike him across the head, driving the thorns deeper into his scalp. Finally, they tire of their sadistic sport, and the robe is torn from his back. This had almost became adhered to the clots of blood and the oozing serum in the wounds, and its removal, just as the removal of a bandage through carelessness, causes excruciating pain and even more bleeding. Again, almost as though they were again being whipped when the wounds begin to bleed.
Because you were forsaken, and I'm accepted. You were condemned, and I'm alive and well. Your spirit lives within me, because you died and rose again. I'm forgiven, because you were forsaken.
defiance and deference to the Jewish custom, the Romans returned his garments. The heavy patibulum of the cross is tied across his shoulders because he was too weak to carry it without securement. Then the procession of the condemned Christ, two thieves, and the execution detail of Roman soldiers, headed by the centurion, begins its slow journey along the Via Dolorosa towards Golgotha, which is the place of the skull. In spite of his efforts to walk erect and upright, the weight of the heavy wooden cross, and together with the shock produced by the copious amounts of blood lost, is too much. He stumbles and falls. The rough wood of the beam gouges into his lacerated skin and muscles on his shoulders as he tries to rise, but human muscles have been pushed beyond their endurance. The centurion, anxious to get on with the crucifixion and eager to do his job, selects a stalwart North African onlooker, Simon of Cyrene, to carry the cross. And Jesus follows, still bleeding and sweating the cold, clammy sweat of shock. The 650-yard journey from Fortress Antonio to Golgotha is finally completed. The prisoner is again stripped of his clothes, except for a loincloth, which is allowed to the Jews. So apparently, crucifixion was done naked because it was a total humiliation. And so the crucifixion begins. Jesus is offered wine mixed with myrrh, a mild analgesic mixture, but he refuses to drink. Simon is ordered to place the patibulum on the ground, and Jesus is quickly thrown backwards with his shoulders against the wood. That would probably knock the wind out of you alone, whether you were strong or weak. The legionnaire feels for the depression in the front of the wrist, and if you feel it, you can find it. It's about right there. You can feel between the bones. You gotta push kind of hard, but you can feel it. And he drives a heavy, square, wrought iron nail through the wrist and deep into the wood. Quickly he moves to the other side and repeats the action, being careful not to pull the arms too tight, but to allow them some flexation and some movement. The left foot is pressed against the right foot, and with both feet extended, toes down, a nail is driven through the arch of the feet, leaving the knees also moderately flexed. The victim is now crucified. As he slowly sags down with more and more weight on the nails in his wrists, excruciating, fiery pain shoots along the fingers and up the arms to explode in the brain. The nails in the wrist are putting pressure on the median nerve. If any of you have had carpal tunnel tendonitis, you know what the median nerve is and what it does. And you know how it feels when it cramps. Imagine having a nail nick that and making your fists close uncontrollably. I don't think I could stand it. I'd rather be shot and make it quick. As he pushes himself up.